Is 6:03 p.m. and Thursday, April 17, 2025. I now call to order a station area task force meeting. First order of business is roll call. I'm going to turn this over to staff to call roll.
Thank you, Chair. Just a note, Member Mayor, Member Hashimoto, and Member Stockwell notified staff in advance that they're not going to be in attendance this evening. Member Marinero.
Present.
Member Collins.
Present.
Member Evans.
Present.
Member Ganesh.
Present.
Member Hashimoto. Member Huff.
Here.
Member Lung.
Here.
Member Mayor. Member Andrasek.
Here.
Member Plain.
Here.
Member Stockwell.
Thank you. Looks like we have a quorum. Is there a motion to excuse members Hashimoto, Mayor, and Stockwell?
I motion.
Thank you. And second, those who are in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. Motion passes unanimous to excuse those three members. And then next we have is the declaration of SATF procedures. Staff, please read the SATF meeting procedures in the record.
Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the SATF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures and time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and any staff reports for each item on the agenda are available online on the Station Area Specific Plan website, as well as at the city clerk on the city clerk's website.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the consent calendar. It's on staff.
Apologies. The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted or approved by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. We have one item on the consent calendar, and that is the meeting minutes from February 20th, 2025.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I motion.
Second.
Thank you. Those who are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain. Thank you. Motion passes, 3 absence on the consent calendar. So we'll move on to general business. And then the item is the Santa Clara Station Area Task Force review of the draft plan alternatives for refinement. And I'll turn this over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so tonight we'll have a presentation from our consultant, WRT. Jim and Deeksha are online tonight. And so they'll be giving us a presentation, and then there'll be time for Q&A as well as public comment.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, should I share screen?
Yeah. So welcome, everyone. Sorry we can't be with you in person tonight. It's good to see everybody, and this is a really exciting and important point in our process. And our objective for tonight's meeting is twofold. And I'm gonna let Deeksha sort of walk us through some of the materials, but there are really two aspects of tonight's meeting. We got a series of comments from the task force the last time we were together. So we have given those comments some thought. We've categorized them into sort of the important modifications to the plan. So we want to present those back to the task force and get your endorsement on those changes so that we can carry the 3 options forward to the community meeting. And secondly, we really want this serves as our last sort of check-in with all of you before we take all of this material to the community. So, you know, the presentation tonight in addition to showing specific changes in response to your comments, is also meant to show sort of the body of information that would be carried forward to the community. So it's, you know, both about the main framework of the plan, but also all of the associated placemaking strategies that go along with that framework to really create a strong district and a strong sense of place. So those are our two main objectives tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diksha to go ahead and walk us through our materials.
Okay, hello, welcome everyone. So Jim already highlighted sort of our agenda. So we'll first go over some of the comments from last time and our updates, and then we'll talk through some of the placemaking strategies that we've been talking about. And if there is anything else that we should also be thinking about before we go to the community at large. So just jumping in from our last time meeting, we had 3 development concepts where we were talking about maximizing heights and densities through the VTA playbook vision. We were talking about maybe a step down into the more market feasible residential options right now, but within that, how to maximize residential output. And then we were looking at the strategic growth mix option where we were looking at some parcels which might stay within the long-term time frame as well. And we were also starting to plug in some of the other development proposals that we're already seeing within the district, which might sort of get set into place. So from that time, we then received this sort of feedback from all of you. We talked about stepping back new development and scaling transitions near the historic train station to preserve its visibility and character a lot more. We wanted to prioritize placemaking and maybe go in the direction of a few slightly more iconic architectural interests around the station that serve as markers and become visual focal points to identify where the station is. We talked about mixed use intensification along Brookov for people as they come out of the BART station, but we didn't want to have tall wall-like developments. We wanted maybe to look at more podium buildings with slimmer towers, which allowed for views around as well. And we did want to emphasize Franklin Street as a visual and pedestrian access to the station, and Benton Street could serve as an alternative access as well. And then as we were going closer to the Old Quad neighborhood and having development abutting existing single-family residential, we wanted to sort of scale back and step down to maybe a in-between 3 to 4 story kind of architectural character to give those buildings breathing room. And then we wanted to maximize heights east of the train tracks, near El Camino Real and near the train station. We also wanted to vary the size of parks and public space so that we could fulfill the different needs of the neighborhood and the commuters as well. And creation of public streets, especially north of the tracks where there is a lack of a well-defined grid as of now. And we wanted to distinguish between public streets and private access ways. And then we were thinking about looking at innovative redevelopment models like the Costco in LA. And we also received caution to be mindful of property lines, especially in the industrial area, to build more feasible street extensions where possible. So those were some of the things that we talked about last time. And so we went back and we started playing around with the model a little bit to create some variations from what we heard. So the first thing that we might talk about is sculpting the development around the train station. So this is what we had last time. And then so we went back and sort of refinessed that. So one of the ideas was to move the tower away from in front of the historic train station, but put it to the other side to create a little more public space in front of the train station to sort of make sure that it's still visible from El Camino. So that is like one of the options, to have an expanded public realm and station in front of the train station, but to still have the option of having that plot be used for more development as well. An alternative option for that would be to not have any development on that parcel, to sort of think of that as the transit plaza, station, public space, and maybe have like a series of little pavilions, etc. And those could have retail activation, maybe highlight the well as like civic infrastructure and then build around that. So have a more arts plaza with little kiosk activation. So those are two things for us to think about and have conversations over. The second thing that we sort of wanted to bring about was when we'd gotten this, we'd just gone all out and shown 15-floor buildings in this area, which we had some talks about how it started to look very wall-like. And we wanted to think about more podium and tower sort of formats. So we then went back and pulled down most of it to 7 floors. This is not to say that the heights diagram that we would eventually propose will not allow for 15 floors. It will, but this is just reflecting more of a realistic market picture where we allow for like a 7-story sort of podium and then allow for strategic thinner towers that sort of go up and allow for added density. So that was one change. Then after we went back from our discussions, we touched base with our economic sub-consultant as well. And one of the key things that came up was sort of creating a buffer between the residential and industrial use and how that is not very present right now in this scheme and might not be the best. So we sort of went back and introduced the idea of a linear parkway as a buffer between industrial use. And right now we haven't shown this as redeveloping, but there is definitely the possibility that these buildings over time restructure themselves as this area comes up. And with that, we could have something which maybe fronts this way, has like a double frontage coming along this parkway as well as on the other side. So that was on the first one. Something else that we talked about the last time was intensification along the Brokaw corridor, since that's like closest to the train station. And so we went back and sort of introduced some strategic taller residential buildings right within the first few blocks around the train station, even on this side as well, to sort of create that character along Brokaw, even pulling it to the Coleman and Brokaw intersection, as you can see with this building here.
Deeksha,
Yes.
if I could ask, so if you could, as you're talking, point out the streets,
Mm-hmm.
that right there is Benton?
This is, yeah, Benton Brokaw.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yes. Sorry, I will do that. I look at the models so much that I guess they're embedded in me, but I
No worries.
So, and then in the last one where we were starting to show this proposed development with the 5-story building and the townhomes, we then spoke with the city and also introduced some of the other projects. One was the hotel, which has been permitted. And then the other being along Coleman, that is the proposal for sale townhomes in this area, which are 4-story townhomes. So we've sort of added that in. It sort of changes the character of this linear parkway all along, and sort of breaks it to this sort of 3-block area, and the rest of it, the townhome extends up until the edge. So in that case, there won't be a continuous road along this frontage. It'll actually just turn and come back to Coleman here. So it'll be more L-shaped. But these buildings will already have access from Brokaw, and this development would have access from Coleman. So we felt like that was okay. So those were some of the model updates that we made. And then looking at some of the placemaking strategies, these were the ones that we had been thinking about until now. So looking at activation and which would be the retail corridors to activate. We've been continuously thinking about the east-west connectivity and having conversations around that. We've been thinking about the character of parks and plazas. We've been thinking about the station plaza itself. And then we've been thinking about the idea of boulevards for El Camino and Coleman. So we wanted to bring some of that thinking as well. So the first one you see here is retail activation. We wanted to be strategic and not fill retail everywhere. So this is our first attempt, and we would love to talk through with you all as to where do we think retail, which corridor and which intersections would retail be most suited for. But we're sort of identifying, we want to connect to the downtown. We want to have a station node which has activation around the station itself. Gateway Crossings will have its own retail, which is proposed. We just guesstimated right now where this might be a little incorrect at some points, but we understand that it's more in this inner zone rather than Brokaw. And so to balance that out, we felt like to have traffic move, foot traffic move along Brokaw, and to have more visual and physical interest there. We wanted to load the left side of Brokaw with active retail. The hotel building proposal actually has a corner ground floor activation, so we mirrored that on the other side as well. And
Yes, so if I could just jump in here. So this would be a great diagram to get some feedback from this group. You know, we've always talked about how do we differentiate between these different nodes, these different retail destinations. And if you look at it in terms of what's a given versus where do we have additional latitude to activate street frontages with retail. And the downtown portion in the lower left, we're treating as a given, even though it's not developed. The retail frontages that are shown there in our diagram are the ones that are regulated in the downtown precise plan. So as the downtown develops, those would be the retail frontages, and that would be a concentration of retail. The other given is the Gateway Crossings retail. And as Diksha said, we've been able to glean from all of their sales materials where that retail exists. It does not front on Brokaw, but it does activate the interior spaces, the interior green spaces of Gateway Crossings. So if those two are the givens, where do we want to further supplement retail and activation to create the movements and the destinations that we desire through the district? We think that the train station itself is a place that is a logical destination, that we want to provide activation, that we want to provide retail frontage. And then, so we're showing that. We're also showing just along Benton, not extending retail all the way from El Camino Real down to the downtown. In our minds, that starts to be over programming retail, spreading it out too much. And in today's market, we do need to be very judicious about where we're putting retail, because we can easily flood the market, and then and then none of it is successful. So what this diagram is showing is that we're really focusing the retail in the downtown, in the station, not along Benton, but there's a little corner retail moment along Benton, right at the intersection of Alameda. And then Brokaw, we've talked a lot about activating that as a corridor. So there's a logical connection to get you from the station area at least up to the Gateway Crossings Green, but then does it want to go further? Does it want to cross Coleman and engage the the portion of the district on the other side of Coleman? You already have the hotel over there, so do you complement that with some additional frontage? So, this follows a certain logic, but it's also a work in progress. So I think we'd really love to hear comments on that. We can do that now, or we can go ahead and carry on through the additional placemaking strategies and then come back to it.
Yeah, I have like a couple of small comments. Yeah, so one thing I noticed is the whole industrial area, as well as the group of residential right below the industrial district, that's quite, or at least somewhat far away from the retail node. And I imagine there will be thousands of people living there, a lot of jobs created as well if the industrial area is redeveloped into like a research park. So I'd imagine having maybe a small cluster of retail at the north of the station area, right, near where the industrial park is. I think that would be like a good potential place for more retail. And I also think that the linear park we have, right, that's right across from the Gateway Crossing, I do think turning a part of that linear park into perhaps a plaza where we can have food trucks, outdoor dining, that would be a good way to kind of enhance this retail corridor. And we could even have some retail directly abutting that plaza along the linear park.
So are you speaking about the green that is across Brokaw from Gateway Crossings? Activating that green?
Yeah, so there's like, I guess 3 blocks of linear park, and then across Brokaw, there's also the park on Gateway Crossing. So it kind of forms this like lawn linear park. So I do feel turning like the portion of the linear park directly abutting Brokaw, exactly where your mouse is, that could be turned into like a plaza where we could have food trucks, outdoor dining, performances, whatever, and maybe even have like the retail extend a bit to abut this plaza as well.
Yeah, good comments. Thank you.
Jim, can I ask something? This is kind of the group too. Is connecting the downtown to the other nodes. So in the beginning, Diksha mentioned, which we all talked about, was Franklin was the pedestrian access. Does the group see folks walking from the downtown through the university, which is basically what you're doing on Franklin, to the train station? Or do they see it would a pedestrian walk instead on Benton?
Yeah, great question, Dan. I think we're still not resolved on this. In fact, we just had a giant conversation this morning on this very issue. Is it Benton, or is it Franklin, or is it both? And do they are they different kinds of connectors? Franklin is a paseo, so it's all pedestrian. And that's one experience, and it doesn't have any activation along it. It's university uses. But it is the most direct line, right, from downtown to the train station. So all of that suggests that is a really great pedestrian connection. Benton, on the other hand, is multimodal. It has bike lanes, it has transit, it will have pedestrians, that will be part of the multimodal makeup, and it'll have vehicles. So it's going to be a busier street, more active in a certain way. And there's the ability to have some activating frontage, along the way. Not everywhere for reasons I stated before, but some, certainly you want to activate where Benton meets El Camino Real. So, a lot of it, I think, also hinges on the success of the underpass, right? Because if you connect Benton and Brokaw with the underpass, that's going to start to really give some emphasis on that corridor as a connector. Pedestrian, bicycle, transit, everything. So that, that level of usage would be hard to try to suppress, right? By saying, no, it's going to be Franklin. That's your main spine. Don't use Benton. Well, you've already really given a lot of functionality to Benton by connecting it all the way through to Brokaw. So I think, at least in my mind, and it would be good to hear from the group here, in my mind, these two corridors need to work together, right? And they're different experiences. And you do want really efficient bicycle connections and transit connections, for example, along Benton. And that benefits the station area. It benefits Brokaw on the other side, and it benefits downtown. But then you also have this opportunity to have this great pedestrian linkage, on the Franklin Paseo. So I didn't answer your question definitively, but because I don't think there's a really clear answer yet for it.
And that's why I opened it up.
Yeah, I think
Sean, I'm going to put you, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
actually, incidentally, like I've been actually walking basically Madison and Benton all the way down to the Benton, like maybe about twice a week because of activation, because of like the coffee shop over there. I just walk that length. I don't go through the university. So it kind of depending on like what the, what is activated and like what's interesting to look at, like on the route, like from destination to destination in that sense. So like, it's a little bit up to us on like where it should be activated, like, and when there's something interesting, like along the way, people will go that route.
The other thing to think about, it never kind of hit me just as it did just now, but it could be that Franklin, because it has all of the university on one side, is a little more heavily used by university related activity that are coming to and from either the station or the downtown, whereas Benton might have a little bit more vital connection to the neighborhood. So you could see that emphasis sort of influencing the use of the two corridors.
Well, we need to be cognizant of the existing development because that whole side of Santa Clara University effectively is the backs of buildings. It is used. Students do walk along it, but it doesn't have direct building access. Even the most newly developed ones have access on the side streets that come off of that. That said, that side is, I think, primed for activation on the side that's involved in the station area, because you've got the hut that's there, as well as you've got the 7-Eleven that's up around the corner from that people definitely go to. It is the greater pedestrian corridor because once again, you do have that body of people that aren't just going from there, but you also have to be cognizant of the BART and other station, I guess, egress point, which is going to be closer to Franklin than it is Benton, because the drop off actually drops you into kind of that transit plaza right below it from what all the designs showed. So while Benton does have the bike, the, transit and the car access, I think that the Benton building did a really good job of doing setbacks with parking for people to go through and access that. And any kind of retail along that corridor is going to have a small requirement for that kind of access for people to be able to use it versus Franklin, where because it's going to be far more pedestrian oriented, yeah, you'll need bike racks, you will need parking off of Benton to access that. For Franklin, you don't.
Yeah, great points.
I think over time, the buildings that we currently have and whatever we may have in the future along Franklin will be, Franklin was added after we had two of our large buildings, but one was built with Franklin in mind, so it does actually face out onto, that's our art building. I see that over time, we will be making Franklin more of front entrance, so to speak, for the buildings that we have there as we activate that space, that side of campus more and more. But you're right, it's kind of backside of a couple buildings right now.
Yeah, and is that Sean? That's how we understood it. And, I think that starts to suggest that Franklin as a corridor feels more like it's part of the university realm, right? You're going through the university. It's a paseo, it's pedestrian only. You've got university uses fronting on it. So it feels more like part of that realm, whereas Benton could feel more like part of the neighborhood proper.
But to Sean, one thing I want to ask, and I'm putting Sean on the spot, but how's the university feel about, I'm not talking about hordes of people, but if it's split up, we're assuming that, that's something you want. Is that correct or incorrect or?
Well, there's nothing that precludes that from happening now, right? So it is a street for public use. So, I think if Benton can complement it, that will take some of the load off of Franklin as the sole thoroughfare. Franklin probably might be the more aesthetic thoroughfare.
Yeah.
But Benton may be the more practical one at times. So I think if the two could complement each other, that would be more palatable.
I will clarify that I use both. So like when I'm darting down to the coffee shop for a coffee, I'm going down Benton. And when I'm strolling back, I'm coming through campus, like coming up Franklin. So there's a different use of kind of different mode of travel between the two.
different experience.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, no, I was just thinking of, is that something the university wants? Where I would say it grows pretty big, and yeah, you got a train of people.
The downtown itself, I think, is going to be the driver for that. Whether we did anything else to Franklin or left it as is, if we had a vibrant downtown, I think that would be drawing masses anyways. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the things that came up in our discussion this morning was the downtown, you could make a little bit more of that Benton and Lafayette corner. We, in fact, during the downtown precise plan, we talked about that corner being a hotel. That's an area where you've got both city ownership and university ownership in the parcel on that block. And if you had something like that on the corner and you had an active frontage on the street, it's the hotel cafe or restaurant or something that could sort of help make that connection to go from Franklin to Benton if you choose to go that way. So I think there's a little bit of tweaking that could be done there, to sort of help encourage both, and I think the way that I think it was Sean that said these two corridors can complement each other. I think that's a good way of looking at it.
I think,
One question I have is, and I don't know if this is going to come up when you start to talk about boulevards or not. But, you know, what are the opportunities as far as pedestrian sidewalk widths that support, you know, larger volumes of pedestrians for a variety of these different uses? One of which we haven't even really talked about, which is, say, a game day at PayPal Park. The others are the ones we have been talking about, like downtown, like Santa Clara University, just the residents and the workers of this specific plan, the transit passengers and all the rest. In my mind, you almost have to circle back to this retail question after we have the discussion about the boulevards, because I feel like those two things should probably intersect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sidewalk capacity, sidewalk width, you know, certainly we want to look at that on the boulevards, but also these streets that connect to the boulevards. You know, like for Benton, we did study that cross section during the downtown precise plan, but we should look at it again here for this segment of Benton and just make sure that we've got the right balance between bike lane and vehicular and pedestrian. So yeah, it's a great point.
yeah, I think an important one would be to look at Brokaw as well, which we haven't as of now, and it won't be in the Boulevard conversation, but that is where if we want a lot of people to be getting out of BART and then like going into all of these areas, then we need to have a healthy sidewalk capacity for that.
Do you guys, I'm asking too many questions. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Jim, this time. The sidewalk width of the downtown is, I forgot.
20 on Franklin.
Okay.
And then the other streets were slightly smaller. Main Street was also pretty wide because we did the double row of trees on it. The other ones I'm trying to remember, but maybe they were
It
around
was like 12.
12.
Yeah.
Was Benton 12? Or
Good
was it?
question.
Good
Can't
question.
remember. I think we may have had a tree strip on Benton because it has that residential feel, you know, that front yard and porch feel that exists on the neighborhood side, and we were trying to match that on the downtown side.
There
Yeah,
was
there
there was some pushback on that because of transit, but we can talk about that later. But what my point is to Jill's point, the aesthetic pull between downtown and the other two nodes could be sidewalk width, that you've got that, you know, the same type of antique, you know, posts from, you know, that I think there's 6 of them left down there, that you have that and the sidewalks, and it's kind of a inviting way to pull pedestrians to those other two nodes. I mean, it's just I don't know if Benton's big enough to hold wide sidewalks and transit and, you know, everything else we're talking about, but.
Well, let's look at it. I think it's a good point.
If you want to know, Benton in the downtown precise plan had a 76-foot right of way. So we had 11-foot sidewalks and a multi-use lane with bike lanes and a curb lane that had tree wells interspersed with parking.
Okay, nice. So 11 feet, that's not bad.
So
That's an idea of pulling, you know, again, keeping that kind of, not, I don't want to say form-based code, but that same form to connect the pedestrian to the other two. An idea.
Evans?
Yeah, so I had a quick question first and then some comments. So my understanding is the red here, the active frontage is where we would require retail space. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is retail allowed in other spots, or is it just kind of at the whim, or are these the only spots for retail that we would allow?
He'll be allowed. These would just be requirements.
Okay, other ones would allow, this would be the requirement. Okay, that's my understanding. So just wanted to confirm that. So Gateway Crossings, I had some feedback there. I participated in that, and so just wanted to give some context that the goal of that retail was really to try to activate the park space and then the path along from the train station, because at the time that project was going through, the actual orientation of the train station was that the exit was actually about where that park was. VTA subsequently has rearranged things, so that's maybe not as well aligned as it used to be, but that was the original thought there. Today, the train station exit is right on the Brokaw.
Yeah.
And so which, has its own set of benefits, but, doesn't quite align as well with Greatway. But I do like that you have retail done along Brokaw, because it kind of like complements the stuff at Gateway Crossing and the park. I did like, remember Ganesh's comment about maybe going a little ways into that linear park across the street there so you could activate next to the park.
Yeah.
I do like that you have the station node and like surrounding the plaza around the station to really make like a central spot for, you can, wait for the station. There could be some coffee shops there, whatever, helps activate that area. But for the rest of it, it's not as obvious to me. We would require stuff. Benton might organically get some retail if there's enough foot traffic, but I don't know that we'd have to mandate further down, because I really do believe that the downtown and then smaller thing by the station is really, I think, a better way to build it. I'm not fully sold on the stuff above Coleman. At least today, Coleman is very large. It has been made larger. There's been a lot of improvements to it as part of the Coleman High Line Gateway Crossing. So I don't think that's necessarily going to get down. So crossing that street's challenging. So that I kind of feel like that retail will be orphaned up there. Whereas this other stuff, Brokaw is a little more reasonable, human scale street. And you'll get more cross Brokaw to the park and all that kind of synergy.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great comments. Thank you for that. I never put together why the Gateway Crossings, the narrow linear park is where it is. And you just explained that perfectly. So I think, I don't know that we've ever seen that iteration of the station design. So thanks for clarifying. That makes total sense now. But now here we are, and what are they going to do with that? I assume Gateway Crossings is still proceeding in this general direction, but that would be good to know actually if they've modified their plans at all since the station area, since the station design itself did change. So that's all great context. As far as crossing Coleman, let us show you some ideas, because we think that whole thing can be tamed, and that can become a crossable, humane boulevard. And that's going to be our goal on El Camino Real for sure. We want to slow that traffic down. We want to make it a really safe boulevard to cross, lots of greening, protected bike lanes, etc. So if we bring that same attitude to Coleman, that starts to become a different situation up there, that is something that doesn't have to be intimidating. We can get across there. There's things happening over there. There's this exciting new innovation district. The hotel is over there. Does that start to create some synergy? So let's not throw that away just yet. Let us show you those ideas for Coleman, and then we can kind of figure out what's right.
I think you just have to be careful about how you expose that retail, so there's enough like space, because a lot of these, I've seen so many, we'll call it the podium frontage retail on a street, and it's not easy to access. The parking's in a weird spot, and then you got to walk around the building. Honestly, some of the way the retail got stuck at Santa Clara Square is a good example of like a bad way to put it. Like they put it on the back street there, and it's like it's orphaned, it's hard to get to. The main part, like by the Whole Foods, is good, but like the stuff actually under the, like there's a brewery and some other stuff over there. That stuff is just like hard to access, and as somebody, it's like I never want to go over there because it's buried on like kind of on a street, right, in kind of a weird way. So I just see that these are going to be those tall podium, whatever buildings, and you're gonna get that similar, less friendly retail space. Whereas the Benton, I actually kind of like that they had the little pocket, the retail on El Camino is a little hard to go to, but like the coffee shop there and the little pocket area is actually kind of a nice hangout. So, that's created kind of a safe space. So we just have to be careful about that. I think the parks by Gateway Crossing will help with that feeling a little bit less of a, I'm just on a busy street type thing. But we just need to, I guess, be careful in the plan. And as far as Gateway Crossing, been a while. I have talked to one of the folks over there, and I don't think they've have any plan changes at the moment. They certainly were considering doing things, but if they do, they have to go through a planning process because they have a plan development. So what they have is what they can build today. So there'd be some amount of effort for that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
DTA basically just built what they started designing what they wanted without really taking into account at all what anybody else had really planned for the area or thought about. They were just like, yep, this is what fits and what we're doing. And they really were actively ignoring community feedback, unfortunately, on the station. Until they said they got too far and couldn't make any changes. So
Okay, those are great that's great context. Thanks for that. Any other comments on this retail diagram? Maybe we can just keep pushing through the other placemaking strategies and then sort of come back and talk about how these are all working together.
Last thing, Jim, sorry, I know I'm babbling. Are we okay as a group as far as, I come back to like San Joseans, Yelp about having to walk 3 blocks. The downtown's a half a mile from the train station at Lafayette, I think. If you take that same San Josean and put them in the city, they'll walk for miles, right? Because there's activation centers every block. Do we want to consider retail ready type of I know retail's maxed out right now, but we don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years for Benton. As far as giving people kind of a bait to get to, a destination point to get to the next destination point, or is that enough retail on Benton in between the 2 nodes?
You're saying on Benton between Lafayette and El Camino Real, maybe have some retail ready requirements along there, just in case. Yeah, I think that's definitely worth considering. Any place else? Because I started thinking about your premise, this walkable city. I was starting to look at that whole northern piece of residential. It could start to feel like it's way out there in no man's land. So maybe they're, yeah. How do you lead?
I think that's where like your retail ready type requirements could come in or something like that.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's hard, it feels harder at the moment probably to require that because you don't want to require it all up and down because otherwise you might end up with just the vacant.
No, correct.
Yeah.
I'm not saying up and down at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I actually talked about that northern part as well. I mean, the zoning is going to allow ground floor retail everywhere, right? Like whether it's required or not is the point of contention, but I do have a feeling like 15, 20 years down the line as the population increases, as more businesses move into the industrial zone, we see like 4 or 5-story research parks, all that being built. I just think developers will naturally like locate retail there. I don't even think we have to mandate it in any way. I mean, the zoning will allow it. I just feel developers figure it out. I just think as long as we have the mandatory retail corridor along Boca and that small plaza, that should be sufficient. And any additional retail will just be added organically as the population grows. I'd also like to add that in the industrial zone, we do want to include stuff like beer gardens, maybe arts menus, so on and so forth. And I have a feeling like as stuff like that moves in, retail will just generally like congregate around that. So I don't think we have to necessarily designate a specific corridor for retail. We can just let the site organically grow and retail is going to follow when the demand requires it for the northern part in the industrial sector.
Great. Yeah, no, that's good feedback. Okay, let's push through here and then we can come back to more discussion. So Diksha, do you want to Do you want to keep us moving?
Yes, let's do that. So from there, we don't need to dwell on this one maybe too much right now, but we definitely, in terms of placemaking, we definitely want to go to the community with east-west connectivity and what does that look like? Whether we have an underpass, overhead bridges. And I'm missing this, and I was reminded of it this morning, is that we definitely want to talk about the existing pedestrian underpass that we have also. And ways to maybe improve the output on the other side, because that is in existing infrastructure and would be good to reinvent that a little to see how it can serve the community better.
Can we go back to that? Yeah, I think we want to be careful with the overhead bridge on the right because it's really close to the historic buildings. And like, actually in all the drawings, is there a way for you to change the colors for the depot and also the signal, like put the signal tower and the sheds in there? So like we're highlighting the historic buildings as well.
Yeah, definitely. We can do that.
Yeah. So then in terms of the bridge, where would you put it if we had to move it?
Well, before we go there, let me just try this. Go to the next slide, because I think what we actually the next one with the images on it.
Okay.
I think what we're advocating is that if you see this lower left image, you've got this beautiful historic building, and then you've got this very simple contemporary walkway that's going by it. And those two are coexisting together. The historic is being highlighted, for its special qualities, and the pedestrian connector is its own experience.
So sorry to interrupt you, but isn't that the High Line, which was a historic elevated railroad that was built next to the historic buildings originally?
It is, and it was, but now it's this really contemporary landscape element. And, from underneath, you still see the historic steel structure, but the experience up here is that there's this really very special contemporary experience, and it's going by these historic buildings. So I think what we're saying, if you flip back 2 slides, is if we can make that, give that some separation for sure from the end of the depot, but make it this really beautiful, simple piece of public infrastructure. And then both of those things coexist and, in their own right. So I think that's sort of what we're trying to show here.
I think that's like a really good thought. I'm very familiar with the High Line because like I had an office over there. So I think we want to be careful with like the separation and also the design. I do think like having it understated is good. I saw you show the Millennium Bridge over at Denver. I'm also familiar with that. But the difference is like the scale. Because the Union Station is a huge building, and the Millennium Bridge is actually like, it's like scale a little bit better. Like even though it's this massive, like very modern infrastructure piece over there. I think like the scale of like what we're seeing with the High Line, like that is existing in place within the context of the historic over there. And that's what Member Evans is like trying to drive at. So I think whatever we put over there close to the station area really need to be something that emphasizes the historic nature of the depot.
Yeah.
Instead of like having something that super highlights itself, if that makes sense.
Don't compete with it. Make it, it can be beautiful, but it can be very simple and complementary rather than trying to be its own icon and sort of overpower the depot building.
Right, because I can see like the other bridge overhead to be like a little bit more of an icon, like on that side, because that's outside of like the historic area of the trains. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I like that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, another idea I have is to actually integrate the overpass with a building. Because the plaza is going to be to the north of the overpass, right? So what if the overpass actually directly connects to one of the office high rises? Maybe a part of the podium where the overpass connects to is like some public plaza where we have like
Yeah.
a small restaurant or something. And then, yeah, we
Yeah.
have elevators and
Absolutely.
steps.
You know, we don't have the building masses shown on here, but we've actually talked about those adjacent high rises exactly in that way, that this overpass could be another connection to the buildings themselves.
And then one more comment on like design and stuff, because we talked about like when we're standing in the signal tower on the other side of Brokaw, there's a sight line that you can go basically all the way through north, and then you can look all the way down south, like for the where the yard used to be. So we do want to maintain the sight line. So like the design itself needs to have the element where you can see through it
Yeah,
to maintain that sight line. So.
yeah, good.
So as in like the transparent, like not having something which is like blocking too much, but is maybe as thin as possible with like as much.
Like, yeah, like glass wires, like something so you can see through, so you can maintain it. So like it's a little bit, when you're at the station area is a little bit less visible, like from going and looking across that way. Like, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting idea. You do from the side, you can see through it, but maybe from when you're crossing it, it's more strong that way. And I like the idea of the building, because that's like Selfars Park, maybe. You could have a park or something on top, and then you connect the bridge off that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Good comments.
Okay, perfect. We're not going to do detailed building design in this one though, but we will make a note on like the character that we want to make sure that the bridge has, so that we capture the sensitivities around that, and we'll make sure to find more nuanced precedent imagery that can sort of talk about that. So skipping to our third topic, which is parks and public plazas. So we wanted to bring this up where we talk about two slightly different characters and sort of get your read on it. And because we heard last time that we wanted to have maybe smaller spaces. One group was talking about the more longer, one group liked the longer linear parkway. We heard from another where we might want to like break it down to a little more smaller neighborhood spaces. So we tried to test that out within the designs. And we have like the two sizing for the station plaza itself, where we have like one which completely allows for that, and one which has like a smaller sized plaza right in front of the historic train station. And so we were just looking at some precedent imagery of more neighborhood style parks, linear parkways that would become the buffer between the residential and the industrial area. We were then looking at more urban scale parks, which could be in like that linear concept, and activate the space between the residential, coming right off of Brokaw, or having more of like a neighborhood character with kids play areas and a little more topography and nature play associated with it. So we just wanted to share those for some ideas and see if you guys had some thoughts as well.
I personally like the, I feel like the linear strip of green space will help activate the area, bringing, the community from all the residential around it into one area. Just, to me, it seems like that's more activation than the kind kind of segmented blocks of park space. And I'm really referring to the last map you showed where where the Costco is on
Mhm.
the right side.
Yeah, so
I-
you like the idea of this like longer series of linear parks within the heart of the residential neighborhood.
I think that's going to be more inviting to the most number of people versus these little neighborhood parks, which you might still have some of those, but then they become kind of like the domain maybe, or the feel of that individual neighborhood more so than inviting to more people that we're trying to draw into this area.
Not to mention it goes through and allows for greater activation. I mean, I'm with the Cultural Commission, so you definitely got to go say, hey, if we can do concerts or any kind of venue applications there, that would be fantastic for bringing people out, and that would just activate it even more.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I also like the linear park design. I think the way we should go about doing this is have one major park, which is the linear park, and then a bunch of like smaller parks distributed throughout the neighborhood. Idea of having one park kind of anchoring the development, directly connecting to Broca, even having a bit of retail along it, like I said, where we convert a part of it to a plaza. And extending on that, a lot of the buildings fronting El Camino, right, between El Camino and the railroad tracks, maybe we could add like one small park there, because it seems like we've not put any parks in that small segment. Yeah, and oh, is that supposed to be a park, that small thing over there?
Yeah, but that's like, I think that's a part of this like development that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the idea is, yeah, you have a bunch of like tiny parks like that in each neighborhood, and then you just have one big linear park anchoring the whole development, which is what we have on the image on the right. So yeah, I do prefer that over the image on the left.
Mhm.
And yeah, one small thing I'd like to add is the parks should not just be, I guess, lawns and trees and picnic tables. We should have some athletics facilities as well, like a couple of basketball courts maybe, and don't need to have anything huge like a baseball field, but just like small outdoor recreation. We could put like a skate park, for example, in the park on the industrial zone, maybe a couple of basketball courts near the linear park. Just try to like add some outdoor
Yeah.
recreation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are really good comments. And we have the unique opportunity of having the Santa Clara City Parks Master Plan team working on that, right next to us in our office. So we're actually talking to them about the relative programming needs for parks throughout the city, and then what this district could fulfill, in terms of those needs. But definitely, as you're suggesting, these want to be programmed with, a whole variety of different recreation, passive and active, in the way you're talking about. So I think those are really good comments. Another thing, I just wanted to get a little reality check with the group is I hear the preference from a couple of you on this linear park, but we're also thinking about, are these sort of valid alternatives to take to the community to get comments on? And, so I think, we're definitely trying to get a sense of preference from this group, but we're also trying to get your endorsement to say, yes, this is the right range of alternatives, of the different aspects of the plan, right? It's the parks, it's the circulation network, the crossings, the framework ideas, the placemaking ideas. Is this the right mix of options to take and get comments from the community?
Jim, I got a quick, could we go back to the photos of various examples?
Sure. There's this one, and then there was this one.
So freeze there. So, and I know this is a tall ask, but is there, we're looking at real pretty stuff, and then we're looking at the number of people, right? And there's, Jim, you and I have talked about this, that there's real pretty places that are never used, right, by the public. Do we have any kind of stats on the highest activation usage of these various layouts?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think where we would want to get our guidance there is that, you know, the parks team is doing a sort of citywide needs and preferences assessment, right? So they're trying to get a handle on, you know, what's their demand for? What do people crave? What do they want? What do they see lacking? And then we want to draw from that knowledge and then put programming in here that's going to attract, that have the best chance of attracting people. So I think that's sort of the process that we're trying to go through.
So I have a couple of comments, actually. So, you know, if we're talking about pocket parks, you can look at the one that's right on the backside of Benton, where the neighborhood's supposed to extend into. It's a little pocket park. It's like hardly anybody's in there. So like, because it's kind of separated from everything. And the other one is you may want to take some inspiration from Gateway Crossings Park, like in there, to extrapolate from that. Because when that was being designed, we were discussing about activation on that one ad nauseum. We even brought in Patterson to come in to do like a new design. So like what the city actually did was to look at the needs, threw them in there into square blocks, and we're like, that's not going to cut it. Like there's a lot of like different soft elements you need to consider, such as like, you know, shading and like the paths and like what kind of things are like next to each other, like a dog run next to like a kid's play structure and stuff like that. So like those are going to pop up, but like there's already like a lot of the elements like in the immediate area you're looking at that's being activated. So like we may not see the same needs coming up on those. And then the pathways, like on that specific park, we made sure it's a little bit more organic in nature and going around instead of like just straight lines. So we may want to kind of look at carrying through some of that design to the other linear parts where like Costco is and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. Good suggestion.
Also, I spent some time actually like exploring all the parks in downtown, like last week, going around and seeing some of the new pocket parks that developers have been built. If you want me to tell you how to make these parks successful, and by the way, I've spoken with a couple of architects on this as well. Keep the parks simple and maximize usable space. Don't overprogram them. You don't need to add a whole bunch of like fancy things like artwork or this or that. Simple parks that maximize usable space will get a lot of usage, and they'll be cheap to maintain as well. So especially for the pocket parks, I think keeping that mantra is important. No need to include a bunch of complicated features, stuff that requires electricity, or stuff that requires a lot of active maintenance. If you can avoid that and just keep the park simple, include like a nice lawn with a bunch of picnic tables and trees, so those pocket parks will get a lot of usage.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
One more comment on the kind of in the same vein as parks, but it's relating to the office development we're expecting or planning for in the stationary plan. Just generally what these developers and what the office using community wants is amenities. And I think a great example is just looking down the way at Coleman Highline, all the outdoor amenities, gyms, you know, outdoor seating areas that are all encompassed in that office development. So not to say that we need to plan for parks in the office space, but the development community and the end user community who's using those spaces will probably want to see that as part of the development as a perk to the employees. So something to just kind of think about as we're planning for the parks, but also the office space.
Yeah, great point.
One thing that our parks team did bring up, and they were just asking whether we think that would be a good idea. So I want to bring it up to you guys and get your comments. I think Santa Clara has a need for an indoor rec center. And they were curious whether we think this area might be a suitable candidate for that.
Speak a bit to that because we were looking at working with the development on the north side over by Great America, and they had planned for a rec center over there. but that all ended up getting effectively lost with the developer pulling out and such. So if we did have the capacity to put in a rec center, at least some kind of gathering center, I think next to transit would be perfect. But we would need to have it in a way that would allow for people to come on by. So not just, we would be looking at probably a larger parking footprint because of that, though.
And that wouldn't be very suitable, obviously,
Exactly.
highest or best use of our land in that respect. If we had parking that needed to come. Okay, great points. I did want to clarify that this plan won't be doing park design. We would just be allocating space we would just be designating where there would be park space, and then as it progresses, and if the city of Santa Clara takes over some parts and developers build something else, they would go into like the design phase. So while we had some great comments around the design of the park itself, we should think more about, for this plan, think more about the sizing, which areas we want to have parks in, and we can definitely have character imagery to go with it, but we want
Yeah, I
to
think
actually be doing park design.
Yeah, I think we can have character imagery. I think we can also, in the plan, we can sort of put in a menu of
Amenities.
Different kinds of recreational uses. So we sort of tee up the notion that there is a variety, that this is programmed. It's not just one big lawn, but it is, it is broken down into some of these separate recreational components, and then show images to support that. So I think there are ways that we can set the tone without designing each park. As Deeksha said, we won't be getting to that level of detail.
Yeah, we can even start hinting at like the organic pathways that were just mentioned, like maybe adding in that detail in the Coleman area, and sort of like mimicking some of that going forward within the linear parkway. So we can start hinting at some of those ideas as well.
Yep.
So as we're talking about parks and plazas, one of the most important ones within this station area would be the station plaza itself. And so we want to talk about what would make a great station plaza, and how do we want to think about it. So we definitely talked about the activation in terms of retail, food and beverage, some other kinds of uses that would have the periphery of the station plaza activated. And then these are just some examples of other station plazas that we came across. A lot of simple elements that could really create an interesting space, pass-through space, versus allowing for some seating as well for people. And then the second idea, where we only have a public space, civic space sort of in front of the train station, and we have like a bigger amenity. These are two different examples. This one is a station plaza itself, but this one's not. But the idea of like having a pavilion in between, which could have retail activation all around, allow for people to spend more time in this space itself, and have things to do coming in and going out of the trains. And then this one was interesting.
Yeah, and we do have the well, as you all know, and I think in this scheme, what we're suggesting is we'd really embrace that it is a public utility, and it would have to have its own access and for maintenance and monitoring and so forth. But it could be housed in a structure that also extends into other public uses. So it could be part of a larger pavilion, and then the other portions of that pavilion are public amenities, cafes and and things that will activate this space. So, it's just a different way of looking at this area. This does want to be a highly functional transit interchange, right? You've got a lot of bus activity that will continue to come around this loop. Those buses all want to have places to pull over and shelters. And, so there might be a scheme that says, we're really just going to celebrate all of these public uses. We're going to make these bus shelters really civic and prideful, and let those transit functions and the public amenities sort of be the drivers for this space. So it's just sort of a different attitude. It certainly could be an important development parcel, but this is just another way of looking at it.
Can I, okay, as an old timer from Santa Clara, one of the things that has been removed from that area that, you're probably going to think I'm out of my mind, but as people pull up to the train depot, the announcement of Santa Clara, what I believe was I was texting Mary, was over the well was a water tower that said Santa Clara on it. And it was just like Campbell's. And that would be killer to me,
Yeah.
it would be a kind of a beck and back to and it wouldn't take a lot of park space. I mean, you'd have a couple poles where kids could run into, probably, but I just think it'd be a pretty awesome thing to bring back, especially if there's some kind of function with a well.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of, let this be a city landmark, a piece of city infrastructure, but really nicely designed. And then with these other activating uses around it, that could be a very special place.
I think there's like kind of like a mix. Sucre and I were whispering a little bit because like we had a little bit of inspiration from San Francisco, like in Hayes Valley, right by Patricia's Green. There's a little bit of an activation space where they have pop-up shops and stuff like that. So like there's a linear park, and then right next to it, there's like shipping containers that were converted into pop-up shops and stuff.
Yeah.
It takes very light infrastructure to put in place, but it activates the space where pedestrians are. So when I'm looking at like the lower right, it's a beautiful park, but I can see there's going to be a lot of unhoused people hanging out there, and without the activation of like retail and like just having people around all the time. And that's in that kind of space. And I think having like more of the like little coffee shops and kiosks and stuff like that, it would also bring people to hang out over there before or after their transit trip out of the station itself.
Yep, so I want to add on to that. Yeah, so Patricia's got some great ideas. So I think we decided the plaza will be like roughly half size, right? So the whole, I guess, green in front of the station, not all of that will be a plaza. I guess half of it may have like a building, half of it right in front of like the depot will have a plaza. So we'll have like, I guess, people wrapping around like this station plaza. And like Patricia described, either on the station plaza itself, or maybe in that small bit of plaza where the overpass actually meets the building, right? You can kind of see there's a bit of green where the overpass crosses over the tracks, I guess, lands on this side. We can add just light stuff like shipping containers, food trucks, just up retail spaces, like what I have in Patricia's Green and SF. It'll make the space lively. If we need to like take it away for example, if we want to hold an event or we want to change it around in the future, we can easily do it. It's very light infrastructure. Like Patricia said, it is going to keep the place active, keep eyes on the streets. So, and that's obviously what we want in front of a train station, right?
I just want to point out that the example on the bottom right, actually all of these have cafes and activating elements all around. So it's just maybe like the images from the top. So that is not visible and it allows space for like amphitheater and performances as well. Just wanted to point that out that this example also has all of those. I just maybe didn't choose the right image.
Yeah, definitely. But I think keeping the plaza like relatively like flat and open to keep it configurable, right? So we can choose what you want to set up there. We could have trucks, we could have pop-up retail spaces, we could move it all out to hold an event. It'll keep it flexible rather than keeping fixed structures like that in place. And just looking at what train stations around the world look like, a lot of them keep the concept of having a large, wide open space in front of the station that can be used for anything that's configurable and flexible.
Great points. I like those ideas. So I guess just to flip back, Diksha, and to make my other point, are we good with, if you just flip back one slide, are we good with showing, here are two different approaches. This is what we want to take to the public. We want to still be in sort of an alternatives options mode at this juncture with the public. This one has, an open plaza, but also a development opportunity. And then the next one and the next slide shows a different approach. Are we good still with just showing this range of options?
I'm happy with showing both, but personally, I actually do prefer the prior one, only because the kind of secondary one with the plaza open public space does sacrifice a lot of the kind of usability deeper into the project up towards like, the Gateway Crossings area by Coleman and such. Having sacrificed this kind of to be able to make this plaza, I feel like it's better to have kind of the conjoined park area above.
Cool. Okay, good comments. Okay, should we keep going to I think this is the last one, right, Diksha?
Yep.
So yeah, let's talk about boulevards, and then let's sort of bring this all together with any with any additional discussion.
Okay, so the last section that we want to talk about were the boulevards, so namely Coleman and El Camino. And I think we'll focus on Coleman, but we can touch upon El Camino based on what existing plans are there, and how El Camino is being handled in some other parts of the Bay Area itself. And so the idea with the boulevards is Coleman and El Camino really wide, fast-moving traffic, not that friendly for pedestrians, especially we talked about the crossings aspect of them being too wide and not being helpful for people, or very accessible streets in that respect. So this is Coleman Avenue right now. I think its right of way is around 100 feet at certain points. And so we want to think about how we can reimagine that to work with this new neighborhood community. And so we did like a quick section. This section is where Gateway Crossings and the hotel building are. So cutting from here and looking in the other direction. So Gateway Crossings on your left and the hotel on your right. These obviously are tall buildings, but the width of Coleman sort of allows them to have that sort of height, because the building to building frontage here is almost, I think, 150 feet. So we started seeing that Coleman already has set itself back. So there is a whole planting strip coming in, and we sort of maintain that, allow for a sidewalk here, and then we have a tree strip. We then have a bike lane, protected bike lane on both sides of the street. And then we want to create the effect of a boulevard, right? So we want to have multiple rows of trees, and we want to use these wide multi-use tree curb lanes for also the turn lane. So as it goes towards the right-hand turn lane, it could become the turn lane, and that's where like the tree planting area would narrow down. And then we would have, we've taken this down from 3 lanes in each direction to 2 lanes in each direction, but with turn lanes at all points. So there is a center turn lane, 2 lanes of traffic, and then a right turn lane. And we will talk more about this overall and talk about when we met with the city's transportation department, they want us to look further into the regional impacts of changing traffic patterns on Coleman. So as we proceed further into the project, once we come up with a preferred plan, we will, CHS, our sub-consultant, will be looking into that. But that is Coleman, and this is what some of that super tree-lined boulevard kind of streets could look like. This is Octavia Boulevard in San Francisco, really popular boulevard redesign that happened. And these are some other examples where we show what those sidewalks, which are tree-lined, could look like. And this is another example from New York. And then talking about El Camino Real, so we do know that there is the central bikeway plan, and on El Camino Real, it's adding bikeways on both sides of the street. And so this is just like a snapshot from that plan to show sort of concept. But as we look at some of the other cities that have addressed El Camino, there is this idea of the Grand Boulevard. And I think Redwood City and Palo Alto have started embracing that in parts. So this is Redwood City's example of El Camino's redesign, where it's starting to think of El Camino as a grand boulevard with protected bike lanes, with tree-lined wide central medians, and really like changing the character and experience of El Camino with much more safer pedestrian and bike crossings and options, as well as adding public art and improved lighting on El Camino. So since this is already happening and the concept of a grand boulevard exists, we can take some of these learnings from these projects in Redwood City and Palo Alto and try to integrate that within the Santa Clara context as well.
I have a quick question. I know there's also the El Camino plan, I think was restarting or doing some more things in Santa Clara. Does anything you're talking about here, would that, tie into that in any way? Or would we just end up with like a El Camino being different here and changing about 3 blocks later to follow that other plan?
Yeah, we could continue what we're doing in the El Camino Real specific plan on this stretch of El Camino, because the specific plan for El Camino does stop at the station plan boundary. So yes, we should take a look at what we've done in the draft specific plan anyway.
Yeah, it'd be good to have them at least some thought about how they will.
It's very similar to
continue.
the Grand Boulevard concept, which El Camino looked at as well, the buffered bike lane with bus boarding islands. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to throw in, El Camino and Coleman, they're both incredibly wide streets. They're also major arterials. So I do think we should consider adding bus lanes to these streets as well. It could be like allocating one of these lanes to buses, or it could be making it 3 lanes each way with like 1 lane dedicated to buses. And obviously that will require like reducing the amount of space for tree planting, but I definitely think we should try to get bus rapid transit built on these roads. Like we're getting a once in a lifetime opportunity to redesign these major arterials, and given how many buses actually travel on both El Camino and Coleman and how much population growth is going to occur in these regions, I don't think we should pass up on this opportunity to include bus rapid transit in this redesign.
I think I'm never going to say no to BRT, so that's a great segue. But back to your diagram on Coleman.
Okay, 1 second. Yep.
Yeah, that one. The 10 feet, 10-foot sidewalk on the Gateway Crossing side seems, I don't know, that I was sort of quickly trying to thumb through the NACTO guidelines just now. I'm not able to put my hands on it, but that feels a little tight to me. It would be nice if there could be a little bit better balance for the sidewalk width on that side of the street.
Yeah.
I think the concept you have makes sense and it looks good, but it just, it seems like that side of the street is sort of getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah, and
I think this
we-
is actually built,
yeah, this is like what.
but
Gateway
what
Crossing has.
we could do is say, we're gonna address the section that is
The
north of Brokaw.
We could talk about.
And then we can reallocate, make the planting zone up against the buildings a little narrower and make the sidewalk wider. So, yeah.
I see.
May want to also reduce the tree strip on that side since we do already have the 23 feet of planting strip there. And I know that would put the bike lane up against the sidewalk, but that would, also allow an extra 6 feet there.
Where did we want to move the bike lane?
So I would say not move the bike lane. I would just say remove that specific tree strip because we already have the 23-foot planting strip on the other side of the sidewalk. So while it would put the sidewalk up against the bike lane, once again, pedestrian and biking next to one another, as long as it's effectively grade separated by the curb, I don't see as an issue.
Yeah, so we've labeled it as tree strip, but that would sort of be like the furnishing zone where the tree would also be there, but that's where we would like have like the light poles and the benches, etc. as well. So multi-utility zone overall.
Yeah, if I were designing it, yeah, I'd say the sidewalk plus the tree strip, you can just kind of combine that into a sidewalk where, yeah, the 10-foot is like the right of way to walk. And the 6-foot tree strip is just the furnishing zone, right? You can have tables and chairs, benches, yeah, trees, bushes, just anything basically, right?
Yeah. But yeah, we can sort of reallocate and refine that.
Yeah, and one more thing, I'd probably increase the bike lane from 6 feet to 7 feet. Generally, like guidelines, even from NACTO are to make it 7 feet so that 2 people can bike abreast or 1 biker can pass another. So yeah, 7 feet is generally the width we should have for these bike lanes. So that would be nice if we can do that.
Great comment. And don't forget, all of these medians have turn lanes. So they're sized so that when you carve out the turn pocket, you still have a little bit of median that can continue next to the turn pocket. So for example, on the right turn pocket, you can just see a car there on the right, just in the background. And so if you carve out 10 feet for that turn lane, you'll still have a 3-foot buffer against the bike lane that, takes you to the intersection.
Yeah, sort of like this one.
Exactly.
So to Sakrit's point earlier, I do believe at least activating it so that there's the possibility of bus rapid transit in the future on the El Camino portion would be good, but that would almost require us to not, boulevardize that and reduce it down to the 2 lanes. So not this slide, but the next slide for El Camino. Yeah. So we've got the Grand Boulevard concept, and there was the other slide, I believe, that was the central bikeway. So that central bikeway would allow for kind of the bus rapid transit concept to apply to it. Not to mention also comparing this to Redwood cities, which, with Redwood City and Palo Alto, they have the ability to turn their stretches of El Camino into boulevards because they also have comparable streets right next to it. Middlefield is a great example. With us, there's no good use between the other side of the university and Scott as an arterial road on that side of the tracks. So if we gave it a road diet, we would be almost pushing all of that traffic then through the neighborhoods, which is the whole purpose of why it moved, well, around in the, past, why they moved that out of the university. So I'd be a little reticent to want to give it a diet beyond, adding in bike lanes and potentially bus rapid transit.
Mm-hmm. And this is specifically for El Camino.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually just redesigned it right now in front of me. And yeah, I do think that we can maintain 3 lanes in each direction, but with 1 lane given over to buses and 2 for cars. So yeah, maintaining the same car capacity as this proposal, having bus lanes. We can still have, I guess, 2 wide like planting stretches on either side, and we can just plant these like wide shade trees that extend over most of the street. I still think we can get the boulevard design without having to have 3 rows of trees, right? Just having 2 rows of trees can still achieve most of the coverage, but we do obviously keep the capacity open for bus rapid transit. So I do think we should obviously consider that.
And I would say that because bus rapid transit was turned down in the general election for the county, it is a little bit of a toxic choice at the moment, but that doesn't mean that we can't build the infrastructure to allow that in the future. I know San Jose is for it, and given that our stretch is connected to them, it would be nice to actually have that as an available option going forward versus effectively eliminating that option completely by boulevardizing it down here. Yeah, I think that would be a much needed addition. So.
And I am remembering in our conversations with VTA that there was also some appetite to thinking about bus rapid transit on El Camino. Coleman, I'm not so sure about, but we can double check on that one as well. But what I'm hearing currently is priority to try and have like a dedicated bus lane on El Camino. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at least have the infrastructure there to allow for that in the future.
Mm-hmm. So maintain 3 lanes in each direction to make sure that one in a future time could be a dedicated bus lane.
Yeah, with the protected bike lane that's showing the bikeway that you have on screen.
Yeah, and if we do want to like maintain, I guess, the boulevard style coverage while having 3 lanes in either direction, I guess the way you would do it is have a couple of like wide planting stretches on either side of the road, right? So trees on the right side of the road, trees on the left, and you can just get rid of the center median entirely. Like I know it's not perfect, but we have limited space to work with, and as long as you have like 2 wide planting stretches on either side of the road, like next to the bike lane, we can still achieve like tree cover over most of the road, get the boulevard feel while maintaining the necessary roadway capacity.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on that one, just because we've worked on several segments of El Camino Real up and down the peninsula. And greening is really one of the things that's going to be increasingly important as climate change progresses. Heat is going to become more of a factor, and also stormwater. And having ample green space, including medians, allows you to put more shade and have more stormwater management capacity. The stretch of roadway that has 3 lanes on each side is a huge expanse of pavement. And we, as these corridors pass through these residential neighborhoods that we're trying to create more humane places that look greener, are less paved, have more shade. So I really want to encourage us to put greening at the top of our priority list, because it's going to make a huge impact out here.
Yeah, I think like for example, if you just do like 6 lanes across, I mean that's actually a lot less friendly for pedestrians. You kind of lose the safe space in the center. I think I've read that like often the trees down the center actually encourage folks to drive a little slower, and they act as like a bit of a barrier. So otherwise you're just creating like a super highway. That's what people are going to see, and doesn't feel friendly. I mean, there's some spots in San Jose I know where they had like some bike lanes, not bike lanes. I mean the bus lane. And those streets are really wide, and I don't want to cross them like as a pedestrian. They're not friendly for that, because they're not split up like in your drawings where you have like that kind of central, we'll call it safe space in the middle. So you can only have to worry about crossing 3 lanes. You could stop and cross 3 lanes. Otherwise it's like you're crossing San Tomas. And I don't know if any of you walked across San Tomas. I used to do that a lot at my building, and it's not fun. But, and so that's what you're looking at building from what you see as a driver, right? That's just what how people treat those things.
Yeah, so
Right,
I think,
but also, oh, sorry if I may,
yeah,
Jim.
go ahead, please.
The narrowing down of travel lanes tends to be as much of an effective, if not more effective tactic to slowing down the traffic compared to the width of a median, for example. Also, I think there's a quandary about providing a median as like a haven for pedestrians because ideally you don't want pedestrians to seek a haven in the middle of the road from a safety perspective. You want to actually accommodate them to be able to cross the entire street within like a reasonable pedestrian crossing cycle or pedestrian cross time. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but obviously when the roadway width is a clear fixed constraint, you do have to start to make tough choices here.
Yeah, I think the challenge is more that if you have 6 lanes, like 3 in each direction, I think that's where you start running into these, like just getting across those, no matter how you do it is really difficult in a reasonable cycle.
Well, yes, I mean, there are other treatments at intersections that could be done where you bulb out the curb so that you get a shorter effective crossing distance and things along those lines. I don't know the extent to which this plan can discuss those things, but I would think that we would want like a full spectrum of these intersection treatments that lend themselves to much higher pedestrian safety.
Yeah, I like the points that Jill brings up as well. So if we do choose to go with 3 lanes in either direction with maybe a BRD station in the middle, 1 left turn lane, it will be about 80 feet from curb to curb, which obviously that's not perfect, but it is actually less than the crossing distance that we have right now. And yeah, having like, I guess, a waiting space in the median, we ideally don't want to have people like crossing half the street, waiting in between cars going 45 miles per hour and then crossing the other half. So yeah, either way, like we don't want people to cross the street in one go from end to end. And like we said, we have limited space. We're not going to come up with a perfect solution either way, but I just do think having the space for the BRT lanes is preferable to narrowing the street to 2 lanes either direction, because once we do that, it's going to be impossible to add BRT because people are not going to want to reduce it to 1 car in each direction. And it's definitely not going to be acceptable to like cut down trees to add bus lanes. So yeah, if we do keep 3 lanes in each direction for now, it just gives us the option to add BRT in the future. And I have like created a couple of designs where we can still maintain good tree coverage, still maintain wide sidewalks. Obviously, you have to sacrifice a bit of the planting zone, but we can still get the boulevard feel while maintaining the road capacity for BRT.
I do want to clarify that the 2 lanes in each direction is on Coleman and not El Camino that we're talking about for BRT. So
yeah,
this still has like 3 lanes in each direction, which is the plan for the central bikeway on El Camino.
Yeah, I actually meant, I meant to say Coleman as well, because we do want to have like BRT on Coleman ideally, because it is going through some pretty densely populated areas. So yeah, I just want to say Coleman, if we can keep 3 lanes in each direction, with 1 for buses, still maintain a boulevard feel, that would be ideal.
We would have to look at like how many bus travel lanes are actually on Coleman right now to think about that choice.
Yeah, I think we need to, and we've got the perfect resource to understand this. VTA is the sponsoring agency of this project. So I think if we can try to understand what their long-term plans are and which are the corridors that are likely to have the potential for BRT, I think that could help us prioritize on these 2 corridors.
A clarification, El Camino right now is 3 and 3.
Yes, based on the central bikeway plan that was developed.
Okay, thank you.
I will make the point that the El Camino is currently hosted 7 lines, while Coleman only has the airport connector. So
yeah. which is why I remember that there was like VTA support for potentially like bus only lanes on El Camino to help them like service it better. And as in the current plan that they have, even with the opening of the BART station, they were planning to keep all of their bus lines to the south side at the current like transit center. And so El Camino would still be like the primary access for all of the buses for that area as well.
Yeah, there's some statistic about the 522 being something like the 20th most attended bus line in the nation or something. Like it's a pretty heavily used line.
Great. So these are excellent comments. I think it's good for us to make the distinction with the community about the Central Bikeway Plan being one that it has some level of support and that has a design that's being shown here. And then the Coleman, you know, I think if we can show some concepts for that and make a distinction between these two corridors, I think that would be, you know, good to get some reaction from the community. Cool. And I think that was the last thing. So that was great. And that was a pretty intense discussion there at the end on the boulevards. I'm glad everybody got excited about those, but really helpful feedback. Just now looking back and reflecting over everything, we've got about 10 minutes left here. Are there any other comments that anyone would like to share? And just sort of, looking overall at this body of information to move forward, to the community workshop.
Yeah, I just had one question about the height limits to the north of the railroad tracks. So I know we were having a talk about this last meeting of, should it really be capped to 15 stories? Or if we are doing the podium and tower style format, should you allow it to go taller? I know the FAA will allow heights up to 450 feet. And I do think that we should consider allowing taller buildings north of the railroad tracks, because nobody lives there right now. We're kind of planning a new neighborhood out from scratch. It's a rare opportunity to be able to construct tall buildings without facing pushback. And I do think we should consider raising the height limits whenever possible north of the tracks. South of the tracks, obviously, taller buildings will face a bit more on pushback. It's also near the historic neighborhood, so those we can keep the existing height limits. But north of the railroad tracks, I think we can definitely consider going taller. We had a discussion about this last meeting as well. So
I did want to clarify, based on what the VTA playbook had developed, the height limits for that region cannot go to 450 based on the airport regulations around it. So it's definitely much lower than that. I'm trying to look it up real quick if I can find it. But it was definitely not exceeding 200.
No, I think it is actually 450 feet above sea level is kind of like the floor of where the planes all fly. So actually the building heights will be a lot less than that. So yeah, I'm guessing it'll be around 250, 300 feet or something like that. So
it's, I will try to pull it up real quick. If I can find that diagram.
Other thoughts about heights, just while we're on that?
I personally have a little bit different opinion on just going as high as you can. I just think it kind of compromises some of the integrity of the plan. It's just my opinion. But those are my thoughts.
yeah, and one more small thing to add, south of the railroad tracks, I know we have a few like lots which are only zoned, which we plan for only 3 to 4 stories. I know it's a tough ask, but if we can try to get those zoned for like 6 to 7 stories, would be nice because really 6 to 7 stories, it's when you get the true urban feel. It's also when development actually begins penciling out, because when you have like 3 or 4 story height limits, a lot of times you don't have like enough allowable density to actually for a new development to pencil. So yeah, I know it's once again a big ask. We obviously have to like talk to the community about it, but if we can try to like raise some of the heights to 6 to 7 stories south of the tracks near some of the other neighborhoods, whenever possible, that would be nice.
Yeah, I think I'm going to disagree with Sukrit on this one. While I think there's height, especially south of the tracks is fine, especially along El Camino. Once you get those ones that are directly next to the neighborhood, I don't think you want to put 6 or 7 next to the residential. But I also know that like townhomes pencil, that's why there's townhomes showing up, for example, in the middle of Coleman there. So those might be a great way to connect like to the Benton, type area. Because that's already stepping down to 3 to 4. So you don't necessarily want to go 6. That whole development was intentionally stepped down. So
Yeah, right now, the 3 and 4 story wood frame podium project is what it does pencil. It's the steel frame going north of 6, 7 stories currently in today's market does not.
Yeah, I mean, you can build wood up to 7 stories, right? 2 concrete podium, 5 wood above. So I guess, I mean, looking at like what's penciling right now, it's just if you only allow like a 3-story building, well, there's currently like a 1 or 2-story home, for example, may not necessarily pencil. So I'm just saying it'll be nice if we can leave the options available, right? Like we don't know what the market conditions will be like 5-10 years from now. We don't know whether the developer will plan to build a bunch of small units or a bunch of larger units. So just having as much flexibility as possible with the heights while keeping it within, I guess, the intermediate urban scale where the limit there is like 6 to 7 stories would be nice. Maybe have a step back for the lots which directly abut the smaller houses, but maybe like just for the row of buildings that abut the shorter buildings, we can have those be 3 to 4 stories, but immediately behind those, allowing 6 to 7 stories would be nice.
I can agree with flexibility on the density, but to say it's got to be, 10 stories or 8 or 7, I think just challenges the developers who are actually going to build the product to step into it. And I think Patrick Henry's specific plan is an example right now where those densities are really high. And while anyone could step in and build, no one has done it yet because those densities just aren't penciling right now. And so what we don't want to do is design something that doesn't pencil and takes years and years and years to pan out. And so.
Yeah, I mean, that's why like keep it flexible, keep the rules open. If they want to build 3 stories, fine. They want to build 5 stories, also fine. But yeah, just think it's important not to have like too many restrictions on the development in this place so that stuff can pencil in like different types of markets. And yeah, I do feel like 5-10 years from now, the market is going to be better with regard to interest rates, with how much rents are relative to demand. I do think that post-pandemic, we had a pretty tough time getting developments to pencil, but that's not going to be the case forever. So
I want to make a distinction here between north of the tracks, south of the tracks. I think we're hearing, and we have heard consistently from this group, a more crafted, a more nuanced approach to scaling things down as they come, closer to the neighborhood. So I think we're starting to get a grain and approach to height step downs in that area that is starting to feel right. Could we tweak that, a little bit maybe? But I feel like we're heading in a good direction there. North of the tracks could be a different story, and I think Sukrit is bringing up a question that I think would be good to hear from others. Is the VTA playbook height limit of 15 stories in a sense is arbitrary? They just set that as a possible maximum. And if the airport restrictions allow more height than that, is there a place in the northern area, where that would be appropriate? We've already said that that densifying along the Brokaw corridor, concentrating some density, putting some residential towers would be appropriate up there. How high do we want to go? You know, could we go more than 15? You know, or does that, you know, does 11-ish, which is what we're showing now, you know, feel right, you know, for the scale. So I think that, you know, it's really becomes a judgment call. You know, we don't want to curtail flexibility for the future. So I think that is true. But I think there's also a community sentiment about heights, what feels right, what feels appropriate. So it would be good to hear comments for the north of tracks district about, you know, what feels right up there.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of flexibility up there. I think really the only concern about height would just be, you know, keeping it aesthetically pleasing. You don't necessarily want to like block out all the views of like the mountains for everybody. You know, if you were building like pencil towers or something, which I realize aren't probably going to pencil, like, you know, then go as tall as you want, right? As long as there's views, right? But it's I think it's like, how do you build that without just building like a big wall, right? So that's more of a design question than like there should be an absolute like height limit or anything like that.
Yep, definitely agree with Jonathan, brought us some great points. And if you want to get an idea of a densely populated but really, really nice neighborhood that also has tall buildings, I'm talking 20+ stories, go to Nob Hill in San Francisco. Doesn't even feel like the buildings are 25, 30 stories. Yet walking around, we got some beautiful parks, you got well-designed streets, buildings of different heights, some that are 6 stories, some that go past 20, but overall it's a beautiful neighborhood. I think perfect example of how you can really combine high densities, good heights, while also keeping it livable. And yeah, keeping flexibility with the heights, going up to the FAA limit, especially in a northern neighborhood where we're pretty much starting from scratch, would be wonderful. And I guess when we're getting public comments, we can definitely make the distinction between the northern neighborhoods where we're starting from scratch and the southern neighborhood, which abuts like already developed areas.
So let me just point out that the Nob Hill example, that's a great example, but I think what makes that work is that those towers are isolated. You know, it's one over here, one over there, and there's lots of view corridors around them. So they're not creating a wall, they're not dominating. So, you know, if that's an approach that could work here, and, you know, do we want to sort of allow these isolated towers to occur in, you know, in some well-placed areas? You know, that could be something to explore.
The other thing we have to consider is also the time scale, like in the sense, like how soon do we want this to happen? So like if we're looking at like the current realities of like what actually pencils out, like it's not going to be like the tall steel 11-story buildings that we're kind of thinking about. And also like if we're looking at like, you know, a tall envelope, sure, we can do that, but we're not going to have the coherence, because like if you're looking at parcel by parcel, like within those envelopes, like within that area, not everybody's going to build to that height. So like how is that going to you know, affect like the coherence of like that specific area that we're looking at north of the tracks, right? So yeah, so we need to find that balance too, to say like if it's something that people are actually going to build, or are we going to get like a lone pencil tower just sitting there by itself and nobody else is going to build anything like next to it.
Yeah, good point. Diksha, what do you have here that you'd like to show us?
I just had the height limits that the playbook had based on the airport. And so it was showing that most of this region is within like the 200 to 225, but parts of the station area go down further to 175 to 200, and even as we come right up here, we're down to like 150.
So this is showing the gateway crossings in the light orange.
Yes, so 175 to 200.
So 175 to 200, but then across the way, across Benton, you've got yellow, right, which is 225 to 250.
200 to 225.
No, I think that's yellow.
This one?
So a quick question, what's the 250-foot limit based on? Is that citywide? Is that FAA wide? Because I'm noticing documents from San Jose, where they've got a 400-foot limit off line with the airport.
Yeah, so let us check further. So this was like background information that was already given to us
Yeah.
from the previous process. So we can definitely double check to see what lands. But I had been trying to Google it and I couldn't find anything specific to Santa Clara.
Yeah, I was gonna say for
Okay,
San
so
Jose,
we're
they
gonna-
have the it's the Fly San Jose. The San Jose Mineta website has a downtown height limit with their list of maps.
Yeah, which is
And
for Santa.
that's, yeah, that's what I'm looking at, where it
Yeah.
shows those 400-foot limits, which is interesting.
Yeah, which I've seen for San Jose, but I couldn't find anything other than this drawing, which was in the previous playbook document specific to Santa Clara. But maybe Leslie and Rebecca can help us hunt.
Okay, so we're gonna look into that a little bit more and clarify, and then maybe study a little bit what the sort of strategic placement of some towers that might, that might exceed our current heights. That's probably something that we would want to figure out how to get some feedback before we take it into the public venue. So we'll figure out with Leslie and Rebecca how to do that with this group.
And I just obviously want to add that just because you allow up to 220 feet everywhere, does not mean you'll get 220 feet everywhere. Most likely you'll get like a mix of 6 and 7-story buildings, the type of stuff that pencils, maybe a few towers here and there. It's going to be a mix of, I guess, heights just like Nobil. So I guess we'll just take that into account, right? Even if you do like upzone to the maximum height, naturally developers will build like a mix of buildings. So yeah, I guess we don't have to be too afraid about getting like a wall of towers. We like 99% chance it's going to be a mix of heights, mostly like 6 to 7 stories, some taller buildings up to 220 feet. That's most likely what's going to be built.
And I believe that's why I
Well,
brought
but
up
we
the-
have to zone for the worst case. I mean, that's just how zoning works. So I think we have to be careful about separating market likelihood from what someone could do if the zoning allowed. And we just need to strike the right balance.
That's why I think we were talking about the following a bit of the Vancouver methodology, allowing for height bonuses if you're able to go through and put in things that are podium based. So, rather have a 15-story height limit, but have that be doubleable if you once again build that out as a pencil tower with a podium around it, kind of thing.
So it's kind of like the Manhattan like wedding cake design where like, I guess if you look at a lot of Manhattan buildings from the 20s and 30s, they're kind of built in a wedding cake, where as you get taller, the building gets thinner and thinner. And the idea is you preserve that light hitting the streets. Doesn't actually have an explicit height limit, but the building is required to get thinner and thinner as it gets taller. Like you limit the amount of, I guess, lot coverage at specific heights. So you could even like design that for like a podium and pencil tower, right? Like allow 7 stories, like full lot coverage. Above that, the tower can only occupy like 30-40% of the lot, for example. That's just like one idea I'm throwing out there.
Okay, great. So this is excellent discussion, excellent feedback. We're about 5 minutes over. So I want to give anybody else a chance for any last comments, and then hand it over to Leslie and Rebecca to wrap us up.
Got one. Leslie, you might be saying it though.
I was going to do it under staff report, but
Okay, done.
Wait, so
No,
I have to
never
open
mind.
to the public, so
Disregard.
good? I'm gonna open this up to public comments. If there's any members of public, please come up. If you're online, please raise your hand and we'll go. Please state your name if you like, and like your relevant, how you're interested in this project. Thank you. Is that on?
My name's James Viso. I'm a commercial real estate broker. I've sold probably 14 development sites in Santa Clara, 12 in the Tasman East. The Tasman East density, they had a minimum of 100 units with a maximum of FAA height limitations of 220 feet. So in the Tasman East, there's 4,500 units. I think there's like 10 applications, and out of those 10 applications, only 2 or 3 are going high rise. I think there's 2 22-story buildings and 1 10-story. So I think it's not economically feasible to do a type 1. And a developer will say, the cost to develop 10 stories is basically the same to develop 22. So giving them the flexibility to do that, I'm not saying do it over the whole project, but I'm more referring to like the Costco site. Also, in order to convince Costco to sell, you got to maximize values, and 14 million an acre is a lot more than 8 million an acre per se. So having the extra height on the Costco site, I think would be very beneficial. Also, something to think about is in the Patrick Henry and the Tasman East, they had with their parkland, they had dedicated parkland, but they also had parkland which they could activate within their multifamily developments, right? And the reason I bring that up is you're not going to see a pool on the 22-story high-rise building. You will see it on an 8-story podium type 3 construction. And so having the different, if developers with all the dedicated parkland that I saw in your pictures earlier, it really makes it hard and feasible to put those projects together. And so giving the developer some creativity to put their fingerprint on trying to activate their own buildings and get some of that park dedicated, within their project versus everything dedicated, I think that would really help out. So that's one comment. As far as we were talking about the Franklin Street and the Benton Street and access to the downtown, I think having both characteristics for both streets, I think makes a lot of sense. But there is the actual Alameda Street, not the Alameda Expressway, but the Alameda Street, and connecting the Benton to the Franklin Street on the Alameda Street, I think with retail and activating that, where you could switch over from Benton to Franklin and have it more activated with retail. Also, one thing I realized is that on the North Coleman area, you guys have a linear park that goes right through the middle of the major block. I think the block's about 76 acres. That linear park, there's a development with City Ventures, and their application is, I believe, I don't know if it's build a remedy or not, but it's really going to be hard to put that linear park right through the middle of the street with a developer application already in play. And so you're saying that it's going to go through, but it may not be feasible. And so if you're not going to put that street, the park all the way through, where are you going to dedicate that parkland somewhere else? So that was something else. Whenever you have really big parks, like the Grand Central Park right down the middle of the Costco site, you got to keep into consideration that, if these are 20-story, 15-story, 8-story buildings, I'm thinking San Francisco or New York, and it's really hard to have a Grand Central Park, especially if it's going to be chopped up into multiple developments, if it's, 8 pads or 10 pads, right? And the whole thing will probably go to one developer because it is a big piece, but, having one developer build that many units is next to impossible. Most developers max out at 300 units to 600. There's only like 3 out of 200 developers that will build that many units, especially all at once. It'd be done in phases. And then just in general, where you're locating these dedicated parks, it's really hard to put these on smaller parcels because assemblages, it's like herding cats. You get 3 in a corner, one escapes, and then you lose the whole development, and you lost 5 years putting it together. And so you really got to focus on putting these dedicated park spaces on the bigger parcels, or, split it between 2 other medium-sized parcels where it's not all one owner getting hit with the whole park, but it's offset by multiple developments. Right, 50% gets built, in the first phase, and the next project, the other 50% gets built. We did that in the Tasman East, and also in the Patrick Henry. You know, one thing I just kind of, this is not the implementation phase, but when I was looking at the overpass going into the train station, right? That overpass, I believe, sits on a hotel development, right? And the hotel's been there forever. It's a cash cow. It's great. It's next to the university. It's next to the airport. It's pretty centrally located. So getting them to sell their property, meaning, you know, if this is, I guess my question is City of Santa Clara's stance in the past is never to do eminent domain. But if this is the greater cause for the mass transit, you know, I don't know if that would have to come into play to get that development going through that hotel site. And if it doesn't go there, where does it go? Meaning you got to have stairs, you got the big platform like you guys discussed. And so that is a little bit of a concern of mine. I think that's it. I think you guys are right on it and you guys are working really well together and happy to be, you know, it's great to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Please come on up. Good evening, Betsy Magus. I'm a little puzzled about the Franklin Street activation. Right now, Benton is obviously the connection, and I don't see any of the plans connecting Franklin Street across El Camino. So I think you're going to end up on Benton Street to cross El Camino, even if you're walking. Maybe maybe I'm not seeing it. And I'm wondering, to that end, I'm wondering if there are any opportunities or anything that anybody's looking at to make the crossing of El Camino easier, especially for people biking and walking. The Central Bikeway plan goes a long way towards that, but it doesn't reduce lanes and it is still an extremely wide corridor and probably the single most dangerous corridor in our city. Especially for people outside of cars. The plans are showing an undercrossing between Benton and Brokaw. My first question is, what is the status of that? We had a federal grant application in to study that, and I sort of suspect that didn't get where it was going. In the probable absence of that funding, I'm wondering if we should even count on having that crossing. If we do have that crossing, I hope that it will be for bikes and pedestrians and not for cars. Drivers already have the tri-level thing, which is not really that far out of the way if you're in a car. Also, before you build that thing, the buses use the current loop as a turnaround. And if you break that up by building that undercrossing, at the very least, you're going to need to figure out what to do there instead. You talked somewhere along the line about improving the east side of the pedestrian underpass that exists today. In my experience, that's not what most needs to improve. It's kind of boring, but the real bottleneck is the west side with the narrow ramp and the switchback. You talked about the existing bike lane plans on El Camino Real. We actually have the basic study for bike lanes on Coleman. And in the interest of kind of keeping people off of the tri-level as much as possible, that it does some switching back and forth in terms of sides. I think it would be worth before that is finalized, bringing that back, maybe through the BPAC and hashing out what exactly that looks like. In the Coleman cross section, you're showing a little bit of a built-in conflict between the streetlights and the trees. I hope we someday have the mature trees that you picture.
But right now, in the cross section itself, you're showing streetlights where the trees and trees where they will cast shadows. So I would suggest, I know this is just an artist rendering, but I would suggest considering pedestrian scale lighting in that setting. And finally, the city of Santa Clara does not yet have a bike lane sized sweeper. So, and any space with as many trees as you're showing in the Coleman cross section will definitely need the bike lanes to be swept. That shouldn't stop us from building things. It's worth considering how we're going to maintain them, including potentially making the lanes a little bit, wider enough that a standard street sweeper could get into them until a miniature street sweeper is available. And I was going to add that a narrower car cross section will make pedestrian crossings safer and easier. And I think Jonathan already touched on that. So thank you that your comments were on point.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the chamber that would like to come up for comment? Seeing none, I'm not seeing any hands online either. So I think that's all we have on public comments on this item. So we'll move on. So the next item I have, it's public presentations. Is there anyone who would like to address the task force on items that are not on this agenda? And this goes for anyone here, like it can be members or members of the public. Okay, I'm noting that Mary's for the water tower. Thank you. Cool. So we'll move on to staff report.
Thank you. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up on the email I sent a couple weeks ago regarding our meeting schedule and what you can all expect at our upcoming meetings. Let me
May Diksha and I be excused?
Yes, thank you.
Oh,
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great discussions and great comments.
Thank you, guys.
thanks, Jim. Thanks, Diksha. If you're still there, can you send me the presentation so I can get that up on the website? Thank you.
Yep, will do.
So basically, this was outlined in my email, but we will not have a May meeting. That is going to be this evening where we have the community workshop that we've been talking about. That is going to be held via Zoom. We're going to be getting the invites out in the next couple of weeks. So look out for that. And obviously the information will be on the website as well, and I'll send it to you all. In June, we're going to be, WRT will be presenting the preferred concept based on all of the feedback they've heard from you all, as well as the feedback from that workshop in May. July, we'll be diving into the urban design, streetscape, and open space standards. August, transportation impacts and parking analysis, again, based on that preferred concept. And then September, we will not be having a meeting. WRT will be working to finalize the admin draft plan and hopefully presenting that to us at the October meeting. Any questions on that?
Yeah,
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, a question, Rebecca. Have staff been planning to have, I'm thinking about a transportation demand management plan, TDM plan. Is that something that you're envisioning the consultant team to be providing to you, or is staff going to be going out like separately for a TDM plan for this, or are you not envisioning a TDM plan at all?
I think it would be part of our transportation chapter that projects would be expected to implement a TDM plan once they're coming on file, and probably providing a goal of trip reduction, as well as probably a menu of suggested options. But really it would be once the projects are coming on file they would be responsible for developing a full TDM plan based on what they're proposing.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just that there are a number of details around the specific plan that I guess I'll just be waiting until we get to probably August or so to understand if they're going to be addressed in the plan or if they're something that would be addressed subsequently down the road once individual proposed projects were.
Yeah, so once we are set on a preferred concept, that's when we would start the environmental analysis, which would include the traffic impacts, et cetera. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So this could be a repeat form-based code. What's the status on that?
Yes, we will be doing one.
Okay, good.
Yes, we received grant money to do one. No, we do not have a fully executed contract yet.
Okay.
But we wouldn't start working on the form-based code until we have the preferred alternative. So we do have some time to get that grant and the contract signed. So I'm not concerned yet. Any other questions on Rebecca's schedule? And then I'll make my announcement that Dan asked me to make. There was a question about Public Works and the undercrossing at Benton and Brokaw. They did apply for a federal grant, which they did not receive, but they also applied for a local MTC grant for the same undercrossing study. It wasn't as much money as the federal grant. It's a $400,000 grant, which they actually did receive. We'll be going to council for acceptance of that grant at the end of the month, assuming they're going to accept it. But it will be for station access and circulation at the Santa Clara Caltrain station, and it will be for a study for that undercrossing. So it's not quite as much money as we need, but it will be for the start of a study at least. So that is good news.
Can I say one thing on that?
Yes, you can.
So these guys got shot down and Michael Liu,
Yes.
Steve Chan,
Yes.
and Nicole He. They just said they kept going, and hats off to them. So thank you.
This will fund a feasibility study, so it'll get the start of the work.
Yep.
So more to come, but yeah. That's all I had.
Thank you. Yeah, are there any, actually, that was the other announcement. So yeah, we're adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
A second.
Thank you, and we're adjourned. See you in June.
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.